Materials used in this presentation are period in nature and used for educational and entertainment purposes. Furthermore, videos have been used in conjunction with the photographs to produce continuity, in some instances are composites, and fall within the purview of the fair use doctrine of U.S. copyright laws. Attributions are given when required. Welcome to A Moment in Crime, a feature vignette presented by the True Crime Man's Dark Imagination YouTube channel. If you've enjoyed this presentation or any other presentation on this channel, please hit like, subscribe, and hit the bell in order to receive notifications on any further offerings on this channel. Little is known of this gruesome legend during his early life, but we do know that Sawney Bean was born in East Lothian, Scotland, in the 15th century. He later married, and the newlywed couple began their home in Bennae Cave near Ballantrae in Ayrshire, Scotland. The cave had several long tunnels that could be extended should the Beans decide to have a large family, which they eventually did. Bean had trained as a tanner by trade, but for some reason did not practice this vocation very much. At this time, Bean decided to support his wife and eventually their large family through robbery. The long, narrow roads in the area around the tiny hamlets and villages along the way provided an abundance of victims. Bean also surmised that in order for this venture to become successful, he must murder the victims to alleviate the threat of any witnesses. In another act of barbarism, Bean deduced that to remain undetected as well as to feed his family, he would dispose of the victims' bodies by eating them. He introduced human meat as a steady diet to feed his family. Eventually, Mr. and Mrs. Bean would produce 14 children for the married couple, all raised on a diet of human flesh. When the Beans' children grew, they began to have children of their own through incest, and the clan grew to 49 during the course of 2 decades. Surrounding villages learned of something living in the cave slaughtering humans when various body parts would wash ashore near the Bennae Cave. Furthermore, travelers disappeared at an alarming rate. As the family grew, their killing and robbing ambushes took on more and more victims. But no one ever thought to search the nearby caves for either victims or their murderers. It seemed that Sawney Bean and the Bean Army would never get caught conducting their grisly means of survival. But one night, as a married couple returned from a nearby fair, the Bean Army ambushed them. When they stripped the woman and disemboweled her before her husband's eyes, he knew he must escape. The man drove his horse through the ambush to escape. As he made his way through the crowd, 50 fairgoers happened by. This was the first time that the Bean Army were outnumbered, so they withdrew back to the cave. After the attack, the grieving man took his story to the chief magistrate in Glasgow, Scotland, who assembled a list of the missing persons reported in the area up to that time. After hearing the man's story and then consulting with other witnesses from the night of the attack on the fairgoers, the jurist took his case straight to King James I. The monarch immediately assembled an army of 400 troops and some bloodhounds, and led by the king himself, marched to the shores of the Scottish coast where the caves were located. Like before, the soldiers searched the Ayrshire countryside, but to no avail. That was until the dogs picked up the scent of decaying human flesh. When the troops arrived at the site of the Bennae Cave, they lit torches and with weapons drawn began walking into the hideout. Even as the life of soldiers contained many horrors, the soldiers were not prepared for what they saw when they finally reached the inner sanctum of the Bean abode. The walls of the cave were covered with human limbs, pickled for preservation. In another passageway, the soldiers found piles of watches, and another they found piles of clothing. Still more grisly, another dark passage contained the discarded human bones from meals past. After a brief skirmish, the entire Bean clan had been taken into custody. Because the crimes of this cannibal mastermind and his family seemed so horrendous, and Scottish law held no provisions for such offenses, the entire clan was judged guilty without trial and executed. The executioners laid men down on tables and traumatically amputated their limbs, while the females of the clan looked on in horror as their spouses, brothers mostly, looked on. The females then were burned at the stake like witches. Some historians say there exists little documentation of the events surrounding Sawney Bean's life because the Scottish don't care to remember such a fiend. Or perhaps the story evolved from a legend that demonstrated the English barbarism against the Scottish. Nevertheless, it remains a part of Scottish folklore, and the story seems so likely that people tend to accept it as fact. This has been A Moment in Crime. If you've enjoyed this presentation or any other presentation on this channel, please hit like, subscribe, and hit the bell in order to receive notifications on any further offerings on this channel.